اللهم صل على محمد ومحمد يا موسى كاظم يا موسى كاظم تو ساتھ ہو مشکل کشا نور جناب سیدہ یا موسى كاظم يا موسى كاظم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وجل. They carried the coffin of Kadhim with the tears and carrying his children. He takes with him his tears and sorrow, and for Kadhim rivers of tears flow. O Shia, wail the tears in your eyes. The Prince of God has met his demise. With his sight the tears of blood flow from the skies. Patience loved him, so now patience cries, and the body of Kadhim lies. On him his children beg him to rise. The skies within darkness are shrouded, and solution of morning founded. Left us with this Imam shadow, and for Kadhim rose of tears flow. Wail with the rise of a red dawn. With it is deafened in pieces, and the hearts are torn. Haydar upon his sad children mourns, the yearning that hearts for whim should they yearn, when with him Fatima's heart in grief burns. Once again her house on fire burned. Muhammad's voice cries for justice. Qasim's killer to hell is dismissed. Pray upon him and his devil's arrows, and for Qasim rivers of tears flow. His empty jail yearns for al-Kadhim, regards, gasping his soul. The poison will is gasping his soul. Soul and death does welcomes, yearn for his prince in the dust of heavens, and so pulled by his two is al-Kadhim. Heaven's dusted and cries for his orphans. Every soul wants him beside his place. Well is his killers strike upon his face. This is Imam Marsiya, and now for Kadhim rivers of tears flow. Dust of the earth and calls for his body, an empty jail to his grief empty. When he lived he was a soul so lonely. Now thousands of his body and arm they carry. Every eye weeps for its tragedy. Remain in oppression in his family, and Rida prays upon his father. Masuma's eyes shed rivers of tears, his body lowered 6 feet below, and for Kadhim rivers of tears flow. O sign of all worship, patience towards sweet death, granted admission. Sweet death, much like your father Hussein, like you a stranger in a strange province. Death sits with you on his neck and sword sits. But God's heart has not recovered since. The spirit of Shimmer was his poison. With your mourners were his daughter's children, and tears for you, for him were the arrows, and for Kadhim rivers of tears flow, and for Kadhim rivers of tears flow. Bar Muhammad wa Muhammad salawat Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad wajal farajahum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المستحدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا والشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين صاحب العصر والزمان خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان، وَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ أَعْدَاهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ إِلَى يَوْمِ الدِّينِ أما بعد فقد قال الله وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا وإن الله لمع المحسنين صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. I send my condolences to the Imam of our time, to the Maraji, and all of you, my beloved sisters and brothers in the Edmonton community, on the shahadat of our 7th Imam, Imam al-Kadhim, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to give all of you that inspiration and that tawfiq, to have this love for the Ahlul Bayt, to celebrate their birth with them, and of course to commemorate their death with them as well. Our 7th Imam was born on the 7th of Safar, 128 after Hijri in Medina. Poisoned by Harun Rashid on the 25th of Rajab, and the year was 183 after Hijri. He lived for 55 years, of which 33 of them he was an Imam. Buried in, of course, Kadhimain near Baghdad in Iraq. When I examine or look at the life of our 7th Imam, and this was the era of the Bani Umayyads, the Bani Abbasids. And as I've mentioned to all of you before, and I mentioned this, I think during his Wiladat Jashan we had a few weeks back together, where I talked about the fact that the way that the Bani Abbasids dealt with the Ahlul Bayt was completely different from the way that the Bani Umayyads dealt with the Ahlul Bayt. The Bani Umayyads were all about character assassination. They're all about mind control. They were talking, they were looking to use the power of propagation, sending la'anat on Amir al-Mu'mineen's name on the pulpit before any presentation, khutbah, majlis, sermon, speech, class, whatever the case may be, or spreading lies about Imam Mujtaba to the point where his own quote-unquote companions would leave him, or would, of course, speak to the Shamis about the fact that Imam Hussein and his caravan coming from Medina towards Karbala are rebels looking, of course, to overthrow this government of Islam. That's not what wasn't the approach of the Bani Abbasids. The Bani Abbasids were individuals and were a group that believed in divide and conquer, to physically remove the Imam from his followers. In the process, they were hoping that the impact that the Imam has, of course, virtually, or not so much virtually, but when you're not there, the impact is a little bit less. But more so, the Bani Abbasids were hoping that the Shias would think that if the Imam is not in our sight, they're not in our mind as well. Out of sight, out of mind sort of technique. And so while this 7th Imam of ours was born in Medina, he eventually, of course, ended up in Baghdad, buried and shaheed in Baghdad itself, buried, of course, in a place now known as Kadhimain. He lived a very difficult life, as they all did. And it wasn't the difficulty that I want to touch on tonight. It was his approach to that difficulty. And I bring this topic up only because I'm starting to see a pattern. Maybe it's not starting to see. I'm seeing a pattern, especially amongst our young couples who are just getting married within the past year or so. And I'm not sure what they were expecting, but this idea that the moment that things become a little bit difficult, then of course there's talk about leaving, there's talk about ending it, there's talk about forget it, I'm out. And I don't know if they're expecting like a fantasy Hollywood running through the meadows Bollywood scene in their marriage, or they simply weren't ready inside of them. But when we look at the life of Imam Kadhim, think about this man spent half of his life, almost half of his life, or at least half of his imamat inside of solitary confinement. The prisons of Baghdad, the prisons of Harun Rashid are not the prisons of today. I mean, if you compare those two, it's almost like a luxury to be in prison nowadays. Back then, you're talking about solitary confinement where the roof of the ceiling was not high enough to stand, and there wasn't enough space between the walls for someone to lay down with their feet out. So you can imagine now what state the Imam was in, not just for 1 or 2 years, for a decade and a half. And then that statement he has, which blows me away. Sometimes I just can't believe it. He's about to enter this prison. He sees the state of the prison. Him being the Hujjat of Allah, the Imam of the time, a chosen one by God. No crime whatsoever was committed, nothing done illegally. Harun had no idea what to do with him because he thought, okay, you know what, let me bring him over to Baghdad. That should end it, but it didn't end it. Wherever the Imam went, he had an impact on those around him. And so out of desperation now, the tactic was just imprison the man. And the Imam, at the door of the prison, about to enter, converses with God himself and begins to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, God, I asked you to remove all the other extracurricular affairs from my life so I could worship you in complete calmness and complete silence, ease, comfort. And you have heard my du'as, you've answered my prayers. And now you have given me this prison now to worship you in. Like he's on the brink, he's at the door of solitary confinement, about to be tortured. Sent food that a child couldn't survive on. And here he is praising Allah and looking at this cell as his mosque, looking at the prison as his mihrab. And I find that to be incredible. And that's the message I want to deliver tonight to all of you. Is we have to stop searching for moments and a place in this world where there's no hardships. I talk about this to a point of exhaustion. But I still am not seeing the approach, especially like I said, from young couples who walk into a marriage thinking of unicorns and butterflies and rose petals. And yeah, the honeymoon love is by far the most intense, but it's the least permanent. Love has different symptoms to it. Love has different forms to it. The love doesn't change. The form and the function and the symptoms of the love change. But I think that in a very naive way, these young couples believe that I want that honeymoon phase to be upheld. Right? And Imam Kadhim is about to walk into a very difficult hardship, and he converts the hardship into worship. And that's what we should do as a tribute to this Imam that we are here now to commemorate now. We're logged in, we're listening. Now, you know, we wish the centers were open. And I always say this, every program, I wish I can hop on a plane and head down to Edmonton and be with all of you guys. I can't. I'm coming to you virtually, and it's heartbreaking that in this ghurbat, in this tanhai, in this loneliness, we're all in our respective homes and our four walls, we are virtually, collectively together commemorating the Shahadat of our seventh Imam. It breaks my heart. We should be beside each other. You know, some things are meant to be communal. Grieving, commemoration, celebrations of these Imams are meant to be communal. We live in a very strange time. It's not easy to be alone. And hopefully all of you have understood that for the past year now that this pandemic has been going on, that sometimes it's nice to kind of shut off the world, but this loneliness that one feels, yeah, you have your family, you have your spouse, your kids, your parents, your siblings, fine. But if you were someone like me who was born and raised in a very, very active community and a family that was involved in that active community, these have been tough few months for us. He's about to walk into a prison where he's going to be completely alone. And where someone like me would see this horrible prison, no sort of proper sleeping arrangements, no other arrangements, where do I put my stuff, my clothes? But he sees the four walls of this prison, like I said before, as a mosque, as a masjid, as a mihrab, as a musalla. And that's what the approach should be. The approach should be that let's stop running from our problems and let's convert the hardship that's been placed in front of me to worship for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's not alone. Ample amounts of examples that we have, that all of you know fully aware of. All of you are fully aware of those examples. Bibi Zainab, of course, comes to mind. Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. The devastating day of Ashura. What she saw with her eyes, what she went through on the day of Ashura, and I've always said, and I'll stand by it, even Imam Hussein did not go through what Bibi Zainab went through on the day of Ashura. Imam Hussein didn't see trampled bodies. Imam Hussein didn't see heads beheaded. Nothing. Bibi Zainab did. And yet when she was asked to describe that day, she says, all I saw was beauty. The hardship of the day of Ashura into the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Ali is struck with the sword of Ibn Muljim, announces his success. I swear by the Lord of Kaaba, this Ali has been successful. Again, a poisonous sword struck at a time where your momentum is moving backwards. It's not easy. It's very, very painful. And yet his first thought was, I succeeded in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hardship of a poisonous sword returned the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For those of you who are right now struggling in life, and God knows there's a lot of us. My young couples out there, first 6 months hasn't been the way you imagined. Wasn't the way that I drew it up, Asabhay, right? I thought I married the person of my dreams. Maybe he or she is. But remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places all of the necessary tools for you to get to that, that moment of you looking to your spouse with eyes of contentment, with eyes of security, with eyes of love. He gave all the tools, but he's asking us to cultivate those tools. Right? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Surah Rum, verse number 21. From his signs, Allah says, from Allah's signs, He has created for you and from you spouses, so you may find serenity and comfort in them. And He places between the two of them, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, mawadda and rahmah, these two things that are very, very critical for them now to be somebody who is a strong couple. You see, we don't realize sometimes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our murabbi, okay? He's our nurturer. And what that means is, and let me make this point very clear to all of you, and I'm sure all of you hear this before, but let me say it one more time. Those of my parents out there who have multiple children, 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 or 8, mashallah, every single one of those children require a different version of your tarbiyat and your upbringing. A failed parent is one who raises all their kids the exact same way. Yeah, there are some values that are universal, but every individual child is just that, an individual child that requires individual care. So you take the massive topic of tarbiyat and nurturing and you customize it for your child. Certain children need constant validation. Certain children are very, very affectionate. Certain kids need to always be around you. Other kids need to be left alone. Other kids, right? It's up to you as a parent to figure out the personality of your child and raise them accordingly. That means that what you'll ask them to do, what you'll ask them not to do, it's all based on their capacity. It's all based on their personality, on what they can handle. Okay? I have a 13-year-old and I have a 7-year-old. And there are moments now where I ask a 13-year-old to do things and she sometimes says, or she sometimes asks her younger sister to help her, and she doesn't have the capacity yet, the younger one, to help the 13-year-old. And my 13-year-old doesn't get that. I tell her, I go, look, she's 7. She's 6 years younger than you are. Okay? Doesn't have the capacity. Now, younger than that is my 5-year-old. When my 5-year-old gets asked by his 2 older sisters to help them, I don't know, do things he can't do, then they get frustrated. I go, look, stop asking him. He doesn't have the capacity yet. He's 5 years old. If he was 15, fine. Okay? So when I assign them tasks, or when I ask them to do things that they don't like, let's say, and that's always the case, unfortunately, I do it based on knowing their capacity, knowing what they can handle. I don't give them beyond what they can handle. I don't expect from them beyond what they can handle. My wife and I have figured out, between the 3 of them, that sometimes we mess up, what exactly each child can take and can do and can bear. If we can do that for 3 of our kids, God does that for 7 billion of his. Every individual out there has their own respective capacity and respective path. لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ طَرِيقٍ. Everything has a tariq, the Prophet says. Everything has a path. Okay? Now, what resides on that path is completely and absolutely representing the person who's treading the path. Okay? Again, I'm not going to ask my 5-year-old to do things I ask my 13-year-old. God doesn't ask a person who's not baligh for the things that he asks someone who has become baligh. Okay? God does not ask, a woman to fulfill responsibilities that a man is supposed to fulfill. When that happens, when the paths are all crossed up, there's chaos. Right? When my 5-year-old is now trying to do what my 13-year-old should be doing, he breaks down, and rightfully so. He should break down. Right? When today's mothers become the fathers and become the husbands and become everybody in the home, even though there is a man inside the house, then the system breaks down. And we see that. How many wives and how many moms have called me and said, Lana, I'm a single mom inside my house, and she has her husband right beside her, but he does nothing. Okay? My point is that everything that you will experience and I will experience or have experienced is based on me, is based on you. Okay? That means every blessing, that means every test, that means every struggle, that means every hardship, all of it is based on you and you alone. I have read majlises upon majlises on this very topic, but I still see that some people, I as well, don't quite get it, don't quite understand it. When the moment that the storm hits, they're going to run from the storm, not knowing the storm was only meant for you. That storm at that moment is going to follow you everywhere you go until you get through the storm. Right? I used to watch cartoons growing up. There used to always be sometimes, this scene where the cloud and the rain would only come down on one person. It's sunny everywhere else, but that one person. If he steps outside the cloud also moves over him. He steps this way, the cloud goes this way. Right? That cloud, the storm was meant for him and him alone. Everyone else either has gone through their rainstorm or is about to go through the rainstorm, but this one, Baba, is for you. Now you can run and hide and say, divorce this and forget that. I'm out. I'm bored. I don't want to and run from this person and that person, thinking to yourself that I'm going to leave the storm behind me because the storm was based on that person. No, my friend, the storm was based on you. Wherever you go, the storm will go with you. Okay? Because God's trying to now develop things inside of you that can only be developed through this one storm. Embrace the storm, get wet, get drenched, and then deal with the drying and the lessons afterwards. Okay, I ask my 13 to do things to develop her, to help her, to push her. Yes, and those are absolutely designed for her and for her alone. I say that because sometimes the way that we face hardships and struggles in our life is that if I hide, if I run, if I become, if I engross myself in a numbing device, if I just kind of close my eyes, if I denounce my religion, if I'll do all these things will magically, poof, disappear. And they won't. They won't. They'll find their way to you through another means. Maybe, maybe the face of the person might change. Maybe you might divorce person A and marry person B 2 years later, but you'll still see a lot of the problems that you went through, maybe in a different form, but God's like, look, you can run and hide, but in my kingdom, there's no running or hiding. I'm trying to develop you to be a certain person. Now, whether you choose to go through this route or that route, the storm is going to follow you. Now, I don't mean to be depressing. I do mean to be real with all of you. We have to figure out a way to turn our hardships into worship of God. We have to figure out a way to turn our hardships into worship. Turn your hardships into worship. The beautiful message of Imam al-Kadhim's life was that he walked into hardship, he walked out as a worshiper. He walked into hardship, painted the walls of that hardship with the color of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll give you a story that I love to tell. A daughter goes home to her mother one day, goes to visit her, complains about her life, her husband, her in-laws, her kids, her job, everything. And just a defeatist attitude. I'm done, Mom. I can't do it anymore. Life is getting to me. Blah, blah, blah. It's too much. I just can't handle it. I'm shutting down. The story says her mom took her to the kitchen, asked her to take out 3 pots. It's a very famous story, by the way. One that I think fits here, and one that I want to remind all of you of. You may have already heard it. Okay? 3 pots are put on the stove, each of them filled with water. Okay? She turns all 3 stoves on, and the water begins to boil in all 3 of them. Okay? She then says to her daughter to go to the fridge, pull out an egg, pull out a potato, and go to the pantry and pull out some coffee beans. Okay? Place each one in each of the pots. All right. So in one pot now there's an egg that's boiling. In one pot now there's a potato that's boiling. In one pot now there are coffee beans that are boiling. And they wait 15-20 minutes. Shut off each of the stoves. And the mom says, examine each pot very carefully. Takes out the egg and sees it's what? It's a hard-boiled egg now. You drop it, it won't break. The potatoes now have become mashed potatoes. They're mushy, they're soft. I'll get to the coffee in a second. She says, examine the egg. The egg went into the boiling water soft, very fragile. Right? If you drop it, it'll splat, it'll break. Went into the boiling water, came out of the boiling water, hard as a rock, hard-boiled egg. Now you drop it and it's solid. The potato went into the boiling water, rock hard, right? It's hard to peel a potato sometimes. Cut it, it's very hard. It goes into the boiling water, spend some time, it comes out as mush. You can literally sit there, you can mush it with your hands. We have these mashers, right? Mashers. The coffee beans did something incredible. They went into the boiling water as coffee beans, grabbed the water, and converted the water into a different beverage. Into coffee. The mom says, you have a choice to make, my dear. You can be the egg, you can be the potato, you can be the coffee beans. Meaning what? That you can walk into your hardship, into your boiling water. One thing that was common between all 3 pots was the boiling water. One thing that we will never be able to escape are problems and hardships in this life. I don't mean to be depressing and negative. I just mean to be real. Right? There's no corner of this globe that's free of hardships. as much as it looks like that family, that person, that community, that center, that building, that country is all free of problems, when you go inside the actual reality, there's problems and hardships everywhere. It's just the reality of the dunya. وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. God says, we created the human being in the cradle of distress, man. We put that stress in your pocket, on your way. Not to say, oh, look at him, he's really suffering and God loves. No. The same way that you ask your child to do things that they don't like just for character development and for flourishment, the same way God does the exact same thing. He knows that we will only flourish through hardships. So God places that. It's temporary pain for a long-term gain. The egg walked into the boiling water, soft, fragile, scared. Walked in, took the boiling water, became hard, strong, relentless, not easily to be broken. The potato went in strong, hard, muscle man. Oh my God! It's so hard to break even one piece. The boiling water hit, the man became mush. He became nothing. You could sit there and break him in one hand. The coffee beans, like I said, converted the boiling water into something else. You can walk in as an egg, you can walk in as a potato, or you can be the coffee beans. And with no disrespect intended, what our Ahlul Bayt did time and time again was they were the coffee beans. They walked into that boiling water and they converted the water into something else. In this example, it was coffee. In the example of Imam al-Kadhim, it's the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Find God in that hardship. Find God in that storm. Do me a favor. Nowadays in Western, Western psychology, they say, look, if you look at something, for example, you're looking at something, okay, does this thing bring me joy? No, then leave it. Does it bring me joy? No, leave it. Bring me joy? No, leave it. Right? We say something else. We say if it brings you closer to God, then do it. If it doesn't bring you closer to God, then don't do it. Any marriage that you have gone through, it could be 6 weeks, six months, 60 years of marriage, is meant as a sign from God. Meant to bring you closer. And here you are 83 days into the marriage saying, I'm out, I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to put up with abuse. I mean, obviously, if there's, bruises and there's bumps all over your body, you're being thrown across no, your head smashed into a wall. Of course not. That's not what I'm saying to you. But a little bit of a disagreement, a little bit of a difference of opinion. We're not mending. Fine, then you guys figure it out. Mend then. Compromise. Sacrifice. Find out what my value system is and find out what I can compromise. Remember, the only person you have control over is you. We want to fix the world. If I was to ask, it always happens. I ask the husband what the problems are. He all talks about what she does and she does and she does. I ask her what he does and he does and he does. And then I ask them, what are you doing? And there's a blank look on their face. No one's ever asked me that question before. Well, then maybe that's where you should start. Convert your hardship into worship. Take the hardship that God's given you, that Shaitan's given you, the world has given you, because there's multiple sources now coming at you, and convert and find God in that. Because in the process now, with every hardship, you get stronger and stronger and stronger. Remember, 5 hurdles in a hurdle race. You've seen this in the Olympics, right? In the track and field category. There's a hurdle race. They jump over these hurdles, right? 5 of them. The most difficult hurdle is the first one. Once you fly over that, by the time you get to the 5th hurdle, with your eyes closed, man, you can jump over that hurdle. No worries. You crash the first one, chances are that the next 4 will be hard. So as the hurdles keep popping up in your life, those hurdles won't change. They won't go away. They won't subside or fade. Absolutely not. I don't know who ever told us the higher I go in faith, Maulana Asad, the more I should expect an easy, comfortable life. No, in fact, it's the actual quite opposite. The more you climb the ladder of faith, the more difficult life gets, because you want to maintain that faith. Maintain that faith. So one of the most beautiful lessons of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam is that he converted his hardship into worship. He converted a jail cell, of solitary confinement into the mihrab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do that. Find the beauty in the ugliness of your situation. Find the silver lining sometimes in these dark clouds. Find God where you might think God doesn't exist. He's everywhere. Embrace the hardship. Embrace the reality. See it as wings to fly. See it as tools to flourish. See it as reasons for success. Don't see it for reasons to defeat, or to be defeated, or to give up, or to be a coward, or to walk away and say, that's it, I'm out. Because believe me, wherever you go after that, that hardship is going to follow you. It wasn't based on that person that you're married to. It's based on you, my friend. That's your path. This is your journey towards Allah. The bumps, the bruises, the speed humps, the cracks, all of that is your path. That path won't change. You can think you're on another path, but you're not. That's the exact same path that you're on. When we examine, and maybe that's why, all of these enemies of the Ahlul Bayt didn't know what to do with the Imams. They would drag their name through the mud, it wouldn't work. They would attempt to kill them. Imam Mujtaba was poisoned 7 times before he was actually killed. That sometimes wouldn't work. Imprison Imam al-Kadhim, that still wouldn't work. And finally, the last resort was, of course, to kill the man. Our 7th Imam was given poison. And that poison was not poison that was everyday poison. Sometimes, the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt would bring poison from Rome, delivered from somewhere afar. And it would have a slow dying effect on them. Took 3 days for the poison of Ibn Mujim to kill Amir al-Mu'mineen. Took days and days Imam Mujtaba's poison to kill him. Pieces of his organs coming out. Imam al-Kadhim for 3 days suffered in that poison. Had handcuffs on, shackled in chains. When the Imam left this world, they say that he was lying there in the floor of his jail cell. Handcuffs were still on, shackles were still on, he was covered in a white sheet. When they went to take off the white sheet to go and carry out the funeral rites, they saw that his clothes were still on, the handcuffs were still on, the shackles were still on. They picked him up and they took his Shaheed body and they placed it on the bridge of Baghdad and they left him there for 2 days, some say 3 days. For 3 days under that hot Iraqi sun, my Mawla and my 7th Imam was left unburied. When finally now his son Imam al-Kadhim comes and buries him, gives him the proper funeral, washes his body, takes away his handcuffs, moves the shackles and gives him all the proper burial rites that a son should give his father. And when I think about these shackles and these handcuffs, I think about my Mawla Sajjad Bimari Karbala. Imam Muhammad Baqir says that when I was giving my Baba Ghusl after 33 years living in this world after the day of Ashura, imagine now for a moment how deep were those handcuffs, how deep was that shackle around his neck, where he would say, I would wash the body, I would still see indents and scars and dents inside of his hands and wrists and his neck from those shackles. How deep were those shackles from my Mawla Sajjad, that in his last days now, Imam Muhammad Baqir says, I saw scars up and down my father's body that were there for at least 3 different decades. But still, I would say this to you, Imam Kadhim, your son came, your son buried you, you were given a proper funeral in Qadamain, but your Jad Hussein left on the plains of Karbala on the day of Ashura. No one there for 3 days to bury him on that hot plain of Karbala. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to accept this qaleel ibadat, inshaAllah. We ask you, Allah, give us that tawfiq, especially our young couples and young people, to please face today's hardships head on. Have some pride, fight for yourself, fight for your marriages. Convert that hardship that you're facing into the worship of Allah. Find God in everything that you do. And finally, Allah, one dua that we have is that when the grandson of Imam al-Kadhim shows up, Imam Mahdi, inshallah, we are worthy of his arrival. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 يا الله يا الله يا الله يا الله يا من لا يقال لغيره يا الله اللهم من علينا برضاك اللهم فك رقابنا من النار اللهم شافي كل مريض خصوصا من دعونا لهم اللهم ألبسهم ثوب الصحة والعافية يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليكم أئمة البقي علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر وجعفر بن محمد الصادق ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر اللهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين خصوصا سيدي ومولاي أبي الفضل العباس وأختيك زينب وأم كلثوم وبنتك سكينة وعلى ابن عمك مسلم بن عقيل. السلام عليك يا موسى الكاظم ومحمد التقي وعلي الهادي والحسن العسكري ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء معين الضعفاء والفقراء الشمس الشموس وأنيس النفوس أيها المدفون بأرض توس. السلام عليك يا سلطان أبا الحسن مولانا علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء. السلام على أختك فاطمة المعصومة ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلى الله عليك يا ابن الزهراء يا صاحب الزمان سيدي الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان عجل الله لك ما وعدك من النصر وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله